whenever night fell, Miyashita Park always found itself engulfed in a peculiar air. In the center of the park stood a large group of people packed together. There must have been no less than 100 of them. Most of them seemed to be in their teens, with some wearing high school uniforms and others, particularly girls, wearing fashionable casual clothes. Within the crowd was an otaku-esque young man with glasses, an Ganguro High School girl, the latter of which was a fairly rare sight in this day and age. From an outsider's perspective, one would think they were attending some kind of event, but upon closer inspection it became clear that their behavior was anything but normal. They were all looking at the ground, their eyes unfocused and empty. Even though quite a number of people were gathered here, none of them conversed with each other. They simply stood there, frozen in place. Every last of them wore the same faint smile, all while murmuring something under their breath. A phrase that their whole bodies and minds were dedicated to saying. Those eyes are those eyes. That phrase seeped from the mouths of 100 people there. Despite their smiles, the chant rose as nothing more than a flat, emotionless murmur, echoing throughout the park like a Buddhist sutra. Naturally, due to the bizarre state the people there were under, no one else was roaming Miyashita Park. A female office worker on her way to home from work and a middle-aged woman walking her dog attempted to pass through, only to find themselves terrified by the strange sight and turning back the way they came. There was only a single man who was paying close attention to the peculiar group. First glance it appeared that he too was part of the group, but in actuality he was standing alone a few meters away from it. Considering his choice in clothing, the man would have blended in quite well in Akihabara. He wore a plaid shirt, deeply worn sneakers, mittens, a red bandana, and a large green rucksack. He was fairly corpulent, which made the buttons on his shirt appear as though they were about to come off. It was late into October, so while the air should have been quite cool, the man's forehead was covered in sweat. In constant war against this, the man attempted to wipe it away with a towel, but to no avail. He looked around restlessly, seemingly unable to calm down, and yet from the way his shoulders moved he almost appeared as if he was laughing. Ever since they had begun, accompanying the sutta-like chants was a distinct mechanical sound, the origin of which was the man's rucksack. Another high schooler, this one wearing a blazer, entered the park. Instead of flinching at the sight of the peculiar group, she kept her eyes locked on them as she steadily approached. The way she walked, her long black hair fluttering in the wind, gave off an aura of pure confidence and gallantry, and somewhat of a contrast to this, the girl carried a half-eaten popsicle in her hand. The group paid her no mind. They were completely absorbed in their own world, continuing to repeat the same phrase over and over again. Being ignored did not faze her either. She did not even raise an eyebrow. Then, as she was drawing closer to the group, she suddenly stopped. She nibbled at the popsicle while remaining thoroughly composed. As she chewed, the distinct sound of crunching escaped her mouth. Once she finished eating, the girl looked at the stick left behind by the treat, clicked her tongue, and tossed it away at her feet. Her eyes sharp as ever, her gaze slowly moved over the faces of each individual in the group. The man with the rucksack shouted at her, the girl now clearly beyond the limit of what he could ignore. Naturally, the girl, Aoi Senna, was well aware that the man had been watching her since she had arrived. With a mocking snort, she abruptly crossed her hands over each other, then straightened her arms out in front of her. Then the area between her hands warped faintly, and the vague shape of a metal rod appeared. It looked similar to a hoe or a shovel, but the shape matched neither of those descriptions. It was a razor-sharp sword, with a bifurcated blade. After a moment, it took a definite shape, a definite shape, and Senna grasped it with both hands. However, it did not end there. Immediately after, a blue light illuminated both sides of the sword Senna was holding, as well as the air directly to the right of her where it was pointed. Just as before, metal pieces appeared from that glowing blue space. As they took shape, they noisily fused with the long blade that had appeared before them. At last, a ring formed, one from which another long trail of light streaked far to the right. The bifurcated blade traced the trail's trajectory as it came into being. Though one might have originally thought it to be a hoe or a shovel, it was now clear that it had transformed into a gigantic sword. Sharp, yet elegant. Translucent, yet destructive. Sinister, yet beautiful. With an overwhelming sense of presence, the sword settled in Senna's hands. The man with the rucksack showed no reaction, simply stared at Senna with a malicious look on his face. With a voice quite high-pitched for a man, he had ordered Senna to leave, accompanying it with a violent gesture. His tone was thoroughly domineering, though he kept his distance from her. Senna, on the other hand, opened her mouth without showing any shift in emotion. It seems to be more of a request for confirmation rather than an actual question. She rotated her gaze towards the man with the rucksack, locking him in place. In response, the man showed clear signs of fluster, providing a fierce contrast to what he had displayed before then. The man, too paralyzed by fear, was unable to act nor answer her question. The group of people muttering "those eyes" paid no attention to the exchange between the two. Rather, their eyes did not even register it. Senna's gaze met with the man's. The first to avert their eyes was him. Remaining silent, Senna brandished the great sword she was holding in both hands in a Kazumi no Kamae stance. Then slowly lowered her hips and then she cast her upper body forward. The sword emitted light once more. But unlike before, what it released was not a blue light, but a light blending together a fierce purple and red. Suddenly, a high-pitched screech resembled a woman's scream resounded. The atmosphere between her and the man was warped with anger, but not the metaphorical manner. It was entirely physical. The very air itself vibrated, converging towards the sword Senna was holding. The red glow of the sword became inconceivably intense to the point of dazzlement. Senna took a small breath and gritted her teeth. A booming sound roared. A shower of sparks surged. A sonic wave erupted, one that sought to blow away the air itself. The vibration in the air then immediately subsided. The sword, however, continued to flicker with a brilliant red glow, one reminiscent of pulsing blood. Senna slowly pointed the tip of her sword directly at the man. As one would expect, the previously indifferent group started showing signs of agitation. Bewildered, they all started running away as if they had returned to their senses. Senna paid them no mind. She simply kept her eyes locked on the single man with the rucksack. The man who until now had shown no clear signs of fear began to panic. He started taking a few steps back, his face turning pale. He shook his head in denial.
誤解するなと言ったはず。
Senna did not even remotely entertain the man's supplications.
質問したのはただの挨拶代わりだ。お前が何を答えたって、それを壊すことに変わりはない。
A fierce glitter dwelled within her eyes. The man shrieked pitifully, turned on his heel, and attempted to flee. However, the group, which had only just dispersed, was now running away in confusion. His escape route blocked. The man who had grown far beyond frantic stopped dead in his tracks. And at that very moment, Senna kicked off the ground, then closed the gap between her and the man's back. It was a blow so swift. It was hard to conceptualize that it had come from Senna's slender arms. The blade swept horizontally, shredding the rucksack the man was carrying. The impact blew the man away. He collapsed to the ground and curled into a ball, covering his head with his hands. Having lost the will to flee, all the man could do was tremble. His groin was now sodden, the man having become incontinent out of fear. Senna walked over to the man and, without paying him any mind, gazed down at the contents of the destroyed rucksack. A collection of small sparks spurted out from within, emitting a crackling sound. There was a device inside. Its shape might have originally called to mind a device one size larger than the modem, but after getting demolished by Senna's D-SWAT, it was now in pieces. It could not be of any use anymore. The deafening mechanical sounds that had been coming from within the rucksack could not longer be heard. Muttering to no one in particular, Senna's voice oozed with hatred. As fall moved forward, it had gradually been getting colder outside. The fact that I'd been able to go out in a short-sleeved shirt only a few days ago felt unreal. The color of the sky was also somewhat dull. Its previously broad tint seemed to be fading. If you went to a park, you would be able to see the vibrant autumn leaves sprouting from the trees. Maybe they were sucking the color from the sky. As I looked toward the sky, I jammed my toothbrush into my mouth. The nice thing about my base was that I had no eyes on me. I could do anything I wanted on the roof without fear of other people's scrutiny. It was also fairly spacious, giving it a nice open feel. My sink was located outside my container, which allowed me to brush my teeth outside when the weather was nice. It was pretty inconvenient when it rained though. As I rubbed my sleepy eyes, I moved my toothbrush around my mouth and thought back to what had happened a day prior. Even after everything, Virimi had stayed in my room until late at night. She had even held my hand until I finally calmed down, which had taken at least an hour. Although I should clarify that nothing had actually happened between us before she had gone home. Two people of the opposite sex and the same age no less had been left all alone in a cramped room for hours on end, yet they never broached any particular lewd topics. If I had the skills to carry out conversations like that, I would have gained normie status a long time ago. Jesus Christ, why was I like this? The part of me that wanted this bullshit sexually gratification made me want to puke. Mimi was genuinely trying to help me, and it was as a friend, nothing more. She had already done a lot for me just by saying I will stay by your side. That alone had made me feel leagues better. Having just that pillar of support made a tremendous difference. Despite the gut-wrenching murder of Dr. Takashina in the numbskull case, I'd found myself feeling pretty stable after the night had passed. Maybe it was because my mind was preoccupied by the patent and the trial records I'd looked up yesterday. The power to project delusions onto reality. Did such a thing really exist? Was I being targeted by Shogun because I had the power to do so? If I did have that power, a childhood memory resurfaced. It was a day I hadn't been able to go on the field trip. The day when I'd been the only one not involved in a certain accident. The bus had crashed, and several of my classmates were injured. And Mr. Saito, my teacher, died. I remembered images of those things appearing vividly in my mind back then. I'd seen them, clear as day. Had it really been just foreknowledge? What if those images hadn't just been foreknowledge? What if they had been a delusion of mine? What if I'd projected that delusion onto reality? My body threatened to start trembling, so I wrapped my arms around myself in an attempt to counter it.
だとしたら僕は
A murderer. Rimi was standing there. Despite how early in the morning it was, she was just as cheerful and energetic as ever. The moment I saw her smile, the trembling I had been unable to fight suddenly ceased. That was odd. I used to get extremely uncomfortable whenever 3D girls were around, but for some reason I felt at ease now that Rimi was here.
迎えに来たよ。なんでポッカーンってしてるの？
Oh, I understand now. According to the minimum attendance chart, I had to go to school today. I had probably told Rimi that
迎
yesterday.
えに来てあげるって言ったよね。
Yeah, it had to be that. Because of Shogun, I'd been too afraid to go out on my own. And that was when Rimi told me I'll stay by your side. She was keeping that promise.
まさか本当に来るとは思わなかったとか？ビシッ。残念でした。こう見えても私尽くすタイプなんだ。
Rimi winked mischievously at me. What eroge was this? I couldn't believe a girl from my class had come to pick me up. It was a scenario I wouldn't have never expected to ever happen in real life. If she wanted to make it genuinely top tier, she should have barged into my room and woken me up. That would have insta-killed me. While I cooked up idiotic delusions like that, Rimi looked up at the sky. The distant look of hers again.
冬の空が色あせたように見えるのはどうしてだと思う？
Well, the sun's light is composed of 7 colors, the well-known colors of the rainbow. For those 7 colors to reach the human eye, they first have to pass through the Earth's atmosphere. When that happens, a phenomenon called scattering occurs. To put it simply, when light collides with the particles in the atmosphere, it gets refracted in several random directions. Since it gets refracted in random directions, it results in light traveling around a lot, and that's what makes it easy to observable for people. The colors that scatter the most are purple and blue. That's why the sky is blue. I was so smart, I impressed even myself sometimes. Nur, dass sie das nicht gefragt hat. However, while my answer was based in scientific fact, Rimis came from emotions and romanticism.
寒くてみんなが下を向いちゃうから青を望む人の数が減っちゃうの
I felt like Rimo had already said something like that before. But when exactly?
だから寒くても上を向いて歩こ
I quickly changed clothes, then left the Kurenai conference hall building with Rimi. Going to school together. For all intents and purposes, this was some normie shit. Shogun and Yua terrified me so much I honestly wanted them to die, and I really meant that. Fucking cues, both of you. Yet, thanks to them, I'd been able to test out Normidon. Maybe I owed them more than I realized. I attempted to force myself to change how I felt about them, but Dr. Takashina's face resurfaced in my mind, and my good mood was instantly blown away. My doctor had been killed, and it could very well have been because of me. Shogun had killed a doctor I knew well, all to set an example or provoke me. I was hit with a wave of pure anxiety and dread. I began to gradually fall behind Rimi. Looking at her diagonally now, I glanced at the back of her head. What kind of expression could she be making? She was humming. She was humming the song from the Phantasm CD I'd lent her the day prior. Her footsteps were light and bouncy. We weren't even talking, so why was she so happy? Seeing her like that, it helped elevate my anxiety, if only a little bit. But it was probably time to be honest with myself. Why was Remy being so nice to me? Maybe the reason lay within the memories I had with her, memories that were lost to me. When we arrived at school, I let Rimi go off on her own and made a break for the restroom. That was one of my secretly OP tactics. I felt bad since Rimi had gone out of her way to pick me up, but coming to school with a girl would make me stand out. Especially if the Decunes in my class noticed. Who knew what terrible fate would be in store for me then? That was why I'd taken a short break in the restroom. It would buy me enough time to make them think I'd come alone. Yet my mission had ended in failure. Putting a nonchalant look on my face, I left the restroom and headed towards the classroom at the end of the hallway, keeping my head down all the way. As I made my way there, I spotted Ayase walking toward me. The moment our eyes met, Ayase's lips twisted into a thin smile. Ayase was a celebrity. I knew I'd be better off not talking to her when we were at school, as it would only make me stand out. Unfortunately, Ayase wasn't on the same page that I was, which she showed by choosing to stop directly in front of me. I had no choice but to follow suit.
匠、あれから警察はどう？
I nearly screamed, but I managed to cover my mouth with my hand. Why would you bring that up in public? I looked around in a panic. The situation was already really bad. Unsurprisingly, Ayase was the center of attention. It was rare for her to come to school at all, and she was Phantasm's vocalist. And she was beautiful, androgynous woman. That last thing was pretty much a universal opinion, meaning both guys and girls alike were immensely interested in Ayase. And they all knew that there was no way she would be talking to an otaku freak like me under normal circumstances. The gazes surrounding me were painful. I wanted to run away.
剣を探して。君はそうしなくちゃいけないのよ。
She always said the same thing every time we met. Ayase may have been on my side, but I was tired of her repeating the same bullshit over and over again like a broken record. I want to get it just as much as you want me to, I just don't know how.
ヒントが欲しい。君はどうやってあれを手に入れた？
いつの間にかそこにあった。
Toll. And there it was. Was she ever going to stop dodging the goddamn question?
気づかなかったわ、最初は。でも、ちょっとだけ見方を変えたら分かった。もしかしたら、匠にももう見えているのかも。見ていないだけで。
And she had lost me. Conversing with Ayase always wore me out. Spare me the Zen cones, please.
剣はちゃんと探してるよ。僕だって絶対手に入れたいから。
Unable to bear the piercing gazes for even a second longer, I gave Ayase a short sight of exasperation, then slipped past her into the classroom. After all that, I became even more depressed. Some of the guys, Izumi-kun included, were staring at me in astonishment. Shit, they had seen me talking to Ayase. I was in deep shit now. Who knew what they were gonna say to me? Could deal with it if they just made fun of me a bit, but I was worried that they go one step further and pick an actual fight with me just because I had dared to talk to Ayase. I really didn't need a demo of a high school gang activity. I dropped my gaze and made my way to my seat, trying to bring the least possible amount of attention to me. I beg you, leave me alone. My prayers were left unanswered. I had to remain silent. I couldn't allow myself to look up.
岸本が誰かとまともに会話してるとこ初めて見たぜ。一体どんな手使ったんだよ。
I beg of you, don't yell so loud. It's echoing throughout the entire classroom. Please, just leave me alone. I have no intention of messing around with Ayase. Even if I wanted to, I'm not worthy of her anyway. So please, stop making such a big deal out of this.
なあタク、教えろって。
大地、
Right then, Rimi interrupted him.
落ち着け。タクが困ってるでしょ。
悪い悪い。
Mizumi-kun lowered his voice and clapped me lightly on the back. With my head still hanging low, I let out a small sigh. Rimi had come to save me yet again.
で、実際のところどうやったんだ？
I didn't know what I had expected. This was the dude who only thought with the wrong head after all.
もう、大地、 そのうち彼女さんに刺されるんじゃない？
心配すんなって。俺こう見えても各種ケアは欠かさねえから。
何それ。
ナタ君教えろよ。岸本とはどんな感じなんだ。
Asking me once again, Mizumi-kun started rubbing my shoulders. While I was reluctant about it, I timidly looked up. About half the guys in the classroom were taking quick glances at me and whispering to each other. Shit, they were still watching me. Don't look at me. Chills ran over the nape of my neck. If you were caught in a Decune's line of sight, you were finished. They'd never let you hear the end of it. All that awaited you was pure, unending hell. What should I do? Run away? Should I just skip classes and go home? I couldn't do that alone. The mere thought of running into either Shogun or Yua left my legs paralyzed. Should I ask Rimi to go back home with me? She had said before that she kept her promise, which meant she would stay by my side at all times, so if she really had been telling the truth before, surely she would skip class with me. Regardless, I needed to get out of the classroom as soon as possible. Suddenly, a real loud sound came from the entrance. Everyone immediately turned their gazes toward it, trying to figure out what was going on. It was a transfer student. Rubbing her forehead with tears in her eyes, she bowed silently to everyone around her again and again. The entire classroom had fallen silent. What the hell?
今の見たか？
見た。一人で勝手に扉に激突してたね。
やっぱ梢ちゃんは可愛いな。
If the clumsy girl archetype actually existed IRL, she'd certainly fit the bill.
また泣いた。大丈夫かな？すごい音してたけど。
With worry in her voice, Rimi ran up to the transfer student before anyone else could. She just couldn't help herself from getting involved. What a meddler. But I guess she was just that kind.
リミに先越された。待て待て。梢ちゃんを解放するのは俺だ。
Making his intentions clear, aka telling Rimi to back off, Mizumi-kun ran over to the transfer student, albeit a bit late. The transfer student running into the door ended up being a blessing in disguise. The guys that had been staring at me up until now had shifted their gaze, their attention toward her. Good job, transfer student. I'd have to thank her later. But right then, I happened to overhear what a group of girls near my desk were saying.
うざ。何あれ。狙ってやってんじゃん。
The whispers were faint, but I knew exactly what they said.
視界にはデッドスポットと呼ばれる通常は使用されることのないいくつかの神経チャネルが存在することをご存知ですか？
それが第二世代と何か関係があるのかね？
そういうことになります。簡単な実験をしてみましょう。これをご覧ください。
子供騙しを聞いている暇はないぞ。
重要なことですよ。この図には左側にドット、右側にリングがあります。では、左目を手で覆って見えないようにしてください。そのまま右目だけで図の左側にあるドットを見つめてください。いかがですか？ ドットを見つめる目の端の方にリングも存在しますか？
いくらドットだけを見つめていても、隣にあるリングがついでに見えているのは当然だと思うがな。
では先生、ドットだけを見つめたままモニターに顔を近づけていってみてください。隣のリングはどうなりますか？
ほう、これは
興味深いね。
右側のリングが消えた。そうですね。これは視界が狭まったからではありません。その証拠に、さらにモニターに近づくことで、リングはまた視界に現れます。
これは一体どんなトリックだ？
いいえ、トリックの類ではありません。普段は使用されていないですが、人間が元から持っている目の機能の一つですよ。これはデッドスポットと呼ばれ、ノアによって人間の視界の中に無から有を作り出す際に使用するチャネルなのです。
After class is finished, I found myself standing still at the school entrance. Twilight was beginning to encroach up on the sky, and a few crows were flying across it, flapping their wings without so much as a caw. I was waiting for Rimi. It was her turn to clean the classroom, so she was taking longer than usual. We hadn't promised to go home together today, but I was sure we would. So waiting for that to happen, I'd been standing there for over 15 minutes. I had no idea how the day would go this morning, but I managed to make it through it with fairly little trouble. Mizumi-kun was so desperate to talk with the transfer student that he had dropped the subject about me at Ayase entirely. I owed it all to the transfer student, really. Speak of the devil, there she was, passing right next to me. With a face that looked like she was about to cry, she bowed her head to me. Despite how uncomfortable I felt, I managed to nod back. I watched as she attempted to leap through the school gate, tripping over herself along the way. Once again I thought about how small she was. She fit the lowly archetype to a T. And on top of that, she was a clumsy girl too. I didn't know her very well, but her perfect blend of personalities made me want to shout from the rooftops. She was loaded with moe traits. And yet she didn't seem very popular with the other girls. What people valued in others really did differ between 2D and 3D, huh? Kimi hurried over to me in a half sprint. She peered into my face with a broad grin. I quickly turned away. Thanks to the setting sun, she shouldn't have noticed my face turning red. Rather than wanting to head home together, it was more like I was too scared to do it alone. I even felt paranoid just waiting alone at the gate. What if Yua was hiding in the shadows? Rimi should have known that, and yet she was deliberately probing me in a teasing manner. Rimi had an unexpectedly distant look in her eyes. They shone faintly with the afterglow of the sunset. I thanked her out of reflex. I truly was thankful though. Rimi had become completely irreplaceable to me. Until I found a D-SWAT, she was all I had to rely on. With a joyous smile, Rimi guided me away. Suimei Academy was in the high-end residential area of Shoto. Every house was huge, and the whole area just oozed with an air of success and affluence. Despite this being Shibuya and still daytime at that, there were hardly any people around. It gave the area this forlorn, lonesome air.
タクって意外とモテるよね。
I'd nearly died just then. What the hell was she talking about?
あれ？自覚ない？
With a chuckle, Rimi shot her index finger toward the tip of my nose. Don't point at people, it's rude, goddammit.
だってこの前はメガネかけた3年生の綺麗な人と一緒だったし。
あれは。
うん、昨日聞いた。タクに意地悪する人だよね。
If you knew that, then why are you...
今日はあのフェスと話してた。あと折原さん、転校してきた朝に真っ先にタクに声をかけてたよね。さらに今こうして私と一緒に帰ってる。ほら、モテモテだ。
Actually, I had been thinking about that recently. Has my life as a normie begun? Are my popular times finally here? Stuff like that. Something that would have been absolutely unthinkable for me a month ago. Back then I would never had the chance to even talk to 3D girls, excluding Nanami. I always boasted about not being into 3D girls, but that was just to make myself look cool and indifferent. So Rimi was definitely onto something. Why had my encounters with girls increased with such frequency lately? It had all kicked off after that chat with Shogun. A scary thought suddenly crossed my mind. What if every single event in this past month had all been a delusion? What if I'd just been having a really, really long dream? Considering how insane everything was, I didn't think it would be all that surprised. I'd be all that surprised if everything went right back to normal tomorrow. Or maybe the person controlling me had swapped out with someone else. Maybe the previous one was happy just watching me go through the emotions, but the new one preferred to interact with other characters, or something like that. Either way, the past month didn't feel entirely real to me. Way too many things had been happening.
っていうか、私今日初めて知ったんだけど、フェスって同じ学校だったんだね。しかも同学年の隣のクラス。
Rimi's voice was overflowing with excitement. I guess Rimi was quite the trend chaser.
昨日タクから CD 借りたばっかりだからすごくびっくりしちゃった。それにすごく可愛い子だし。
Rimi circled around in front of me. While still facing me, she began walking backward. Her voice got all quiet and then she asked me a question timidly.
何話してたの？今朝フェス岸本さんと聞かせてほしいな。私には聞く権利なんてないかもって思うけど、でも岸本さんと話してた時のタク、すごく思い詰めた様子だったから、なんだか心配で。
She'd seen completely through me. I guess it wouldn't be a bad idea to tell her everything. It wasn't like I had other people talk about it. Plus, agonizing over it on my own had gotten pretty exhausting. I'd appreciate another perspective. Not from someone who spoke in nothing but vague, big ears bullshit like Ayase and Senna, but from someone that would give actual concrete answers to my concerns. But when we had talked yesterday, she hadn't believed me at all.
話してたのは剣のこと。
剣って昨日タクが言ってたやつ。
I nodded.
綾瀬は持ってるんだ。
何を？
本物を。
Er hat nicht einmal ihr gesagt, wie die Schwerter heißen überhaupt. I wasn't completely sure, but I thought I heard Himi taking a large breath. She staggered with her eyes open wide and then, after taking a few steps back,
嘘だ。
she shouted with a clearly skeptical voice.
だってあれおもちゃでしょ？
だから僕のはおもちゃだけど、彼女のは本物で、ライブ行けば見られ。
I quickly realized what I was saying and cut myself off. Would she even be able to see it? I mean, Ayase had mentioned that only people with powers could see these swords.
ライブに行けばその本物の剣を見られるの？じゃあ今度行ってみようかな。ファンタズムのライブそのものも見たいし。あ、タク一緒に行く？
見られないかも。限られた人にしか見えないらしいんだ。
そうなんだ。裸の王様みたいなものかな。じゃあ私バカだから見えないかも。なんてね。
Wow. Actually, that was a good point. Come to think of it, I didn't know anything about what exactly a real D-Sword was, nor how it worked. I'd just been accepting everything Ayase said without question.
そんな剣本当にあるのかな。やっぱり私信じられないよ。タクが見たっていう岸本さんの剣も本物っぽく見えるおもちゃじゃないの？
でも光ったし。
おもちゃでも光るやつはいくらでもあるよ。
Hat sie nicht Unrecht. Well, she wasn't wrong. If you wanted something to glow, you could easily slap some lights onto it. But when I thought of the overwhelming sense of presence Senna and Ayase's swords had, their existence became harder to deny. They had an aura about them that no mere toy should have been capable of. And most of all, Ayase had taken the sword out of thin air. I'd seen it with my own eyes. It wasn't anything simple, like hypnosis or super speed. On top of that, I felt as if I'd only gotten to experience the tip of the iceberg.
僕には妄想を現実に投影する力があるかも。
I had no definite proof, but I tried throwing my thoughts at Himi regardless.
だから将軍に、狙われてる気がする。
That was the only possible reason he would be targeting me. There was nobody more harmless than I was. Otakus were fundamentally harmless beings. We did shut ourselves away in our own little worlds after all. If we had time to bother denizens of the third dimension, we'd rather spend that in our heads, flirting with adorable moe
昨
characters.
日調べてた特許のこと？タクはあんな装置持ってるの？
I shook my head.
そうじゃなくて、装置とかなくても力使えるかも。
タクからかってるんでしょ？あ、わかった。何かの漫画かアニメが元ネタ？
Just as I'd feared. She didn't believe me. But I knew I'd experienced what I was talking about before, with an accident back in elementary school. I tried desperately to explain that to Remy, that I might have been a murderer. I knew Mihimi might abandon me if I confessed that to her, but I couldn't hide it anymore. I wanted to tell someone. If I did, I could clear the uncertainty in my mind, even if just a little bit. Even listened to my shaky explanation with a troubled look on her face, remaining silent the entire time. After I finished talking,
考えすぎだよ。
she nonchalantly lost the whole thing off.
そう考えてることだってタクな妄想なんだよ。わかってる？
Was I really overthinking it? That was a nice thought. But even with that theory, the uncertainty in the depths of my mind hadn't cleared at all. The smell of dust wafted through an office. An office situated on the second floor of a somewhat old building. Sunlight streamed through the window covering the back wall, turning the fluttering dust into that of a thin, powdery snow. The words plastered onto the window, Phrygia Credit Bureau, cast a shadow onto a nearby desk. 20 desks were lined up across the floor, with not even a hint of a gap between them. Each one was drowning in an endless sea of documents, papers, and files. Piles stacked so high they looked to be on the verge of collapsing. From an outsider's perspective, it looked far more like a publishing company than a credit bureau. Most of the desks lacked denizens. There were only around 5 to 6 people at best. As for why that was, the obvious conclusion would be that it was a Saturday. But this was by no means the answer. This was made evident by the whiteboard stuck to the wall near the entrance, its schedule densely packed with tasks and projects. Nearing the end of his lunch break, Ban Yasuji opened the door to the private investigation company. He entered without so much as a knock, yet none of the workers seemed to bat an eye. Continuing to act as if he belonged there, Ban gave a quick, "How is it going?" and headed toward the desk at the back of the room. In it sat a robust-looking woman, hunched over her laptop.
Oh, Momo-chan, genki?
In response, the woman continued staring at her monitor with a weary expression. Her name was Momose Katsuko, and she was the president of Phrygia.
バンちゃん、また来たの？
また来ました。やった。入ジュネについての新ネタ、ない？
たく、私は忙しいのよ。抱えてる案件が5万とあるの。うちみたいな零細企業は土日返上で仕事しなくちゃいけないの。わかる？
Momose finally raised her head. She placed a hand on her forehead and, upon seeing Ban's grinning face, lightly shook her head.
ここは警察の秘密組織でも子会社でもないって何度も言ってるでしょうに。ただで情報もらえるなんて虫のいいこと考えてるんだろうけど、ここに来てる暇があるなら自分の足で何とかなさいな公務員さん。または依頼料を払うこと。予約表はみおちゃんにもらってちょうだい。
相変わらず冷てえ社長だな、おい。
In spite of Momose's sharp remarks, Ban didn't show a hint of concern. He simply fanned himself with his distinctive handheld fan, remaining aloof as could be.
この会社立ち上げるときにはあんなに協力してやったのによ。
あら、バンちゃんも恩着せがましい人だわね。なんで同じこと言い続ければ気が済むわけ？
まあ言っててくれ。じゃあ依頼料はこいつでどうかな。
Ban showily pulled out a plastic bag with the name of a nearby Japanese-style confectionery store on it.
なんだ、あるなら最初から出してよ。いつも悪いわね。みおちゃん、お茶2つ持ってきて。
Her attitude having undergone a swift, stark change, Momose closely examined the contents of the bag Ban had handed to her.
あら、栗羊羹、今が旬なのよね。わかってるじゃない。あ、ばんちゃん、そんなところに突っ立ってないで座って。
どうも。
Ban gave a wry smile, took a chair from the closest desk, and seated himself beside Momose. The clerical lady Momose had called for before brought over 2 steaming cups of tea.
なんでなんか新ネタあるかい？
ちょっと待ちなさいって。
Momose carefully unwrapped the chestnut yokan, folded up the wrapper, and set it beside her PC. She then hurriedly devoured the first of the sweet treats. Japanese-style treats were her greatest weakness. They were a necessary offering for Ban to bring every time he came for information.
おいしいわ、これ。
人に言えた義理じゃないけどよ。ちったダイエットしたらどうだい？でないといつまで経っても結婚できないぜ。
本当に人に言えた義理じゃないわね。私はもうとっくに今期は逃したわよ。
With a shrug of her shoulders, Momose took a sip from her tea, then turned to face Ban.
また新しいニュージェネ事件起きたわね。こんなところでサボってていいの？
そっちの調査は俺以外の全員が真剣に取り組んでるさ。俺は別のアプローチから真実に迫ってやるってね。
かっこつけちゃって似合わないわよ。
Knowing herself to be quite sensitive to hot drinks, Ban showed no hint of reaching for his cup. He simply continued to fan his face, in spite of the already chilly air. It was something of a habit of his.
警察は G レートの線追ってるの？
そうそう、G レートね。ありゃすごいな。ももちゃんの話の通りだったぜ。
私が嘘の情報を渡すわけないでしょうに。これでおまんま食べてるんだから。それで？
まあ、勝手に調べてるよ。
勝手にって。ちょっとばあちゃん。
Momose's voice carried well. Her personality was intrinsically energetic, lending her voice quite a bit of volume. The workers of Phrygia were used to this, not even batting an eye as her angry voice reverberated throughout the office. The boss's yelling was an everyday occurrence after all. Ban and Momose were old friends, so he was all too familiar with being on the receiving end of it. Thus, much to her chagrin, Momose's wrath was met only with him lazily picking at his ear. Before she said anything else, Momose quickly lowered her voice, for this was a topic she did not want met with prying ears. But her face was red with anger, as if she had not been cheerfully stuffing herself with sweets just moments before. She pointed her finger at Ban with tremendous intensity.
個人で追うのは危険だって言ったじゃない。政治に宗教に企業、どれだけ根深く関与してると思ってるの？この間テレビで G レートの講義をやった太田教授がどうなったか、あんたもよく知ってるでしょ。
ああ、貼り付けで殺された被害者だろ。何度も聞いたよ。
何度でも言ってやるわ。言ってやりますとも。あ たはいっつも私の忠告を無視するんだから。それでいつも尻拭いさせられるのは私なんてたまったもんじゃないわ。
まあまあそうかって茶でも飲んで落ち着いたら。
Ignoring both Ban and her tea, Momose tossed a second chestnut yokan into her mouth in a huff.
大丈夫だって一応諏訪と一緒に動いてるんで。今はまだ G レートやら何やらってのは突飛すぎて上を説得できねえのよ。
スワちゃんは確かに有能だししっかりしているけど、無理させたら承知しないわよ。
ももちゃんはいつから諏訪の保護者になったんだ。
バンちゃんの無謀な行動に未来ある若者が巻き込まれるのはかわいそうでしょうに。
ああ、そうかい。
With a shrug of resignation, Ban took a testing sip of his tea, only to immediately grimace. It was still too hot.
しかしバイオリズムが人を殺す凶器になるなんてこと本当にありえるのかね。
前に説明したでしょうに。
実はいまいち理解しきれてねえんだわ。それってももちゃんお得意の電磁波と関係してるのか。
Momose let out a sigh, then, in contrast to Ban, composedly sipped at her tea.
満月の夜の事件簿はよく知ってるでしょ。
まあな。
A vast influx of incidents and accidents would always occur on the night of the full moon. This was no urban legend either. No, one need only glance at the Tokyo Metropolitan Police statistical records.
その満月以上の力でバイオリズムカーブが上昇したらどうなると思う？
興奮するってことだろ。
それだけ？渋谷は特殊な街なのよ。言ったでしょ。 GE レートが高ければバイオリズムカーブは上昇する。しかもその上昇値は満月の夜に影響する数値のおよそ6800倍。
想像しにくい数字だな。
比べ物にならないくらいすごいって考えとけばいいわ。
しかしなんで今なんだ。
殺された太田教授が言っていたのは GE レートが半年前から急に増加しているせいってことね。地層の構造に大きな変化が起きない限りそんなことはありえないそうだけど。そう、駅前のスクランブル交差点で火山が噴火するほどのエネルギーが必要なの。
火山？そんなに大きな力なのか。
それくらい今の GE レートはありえない状況なのよ。
それを世間に訴えようとした教授はニュージェネで殺された。
事件の前日に教授が出演する予定だったテレビ番組が急遽放送中止になった話知ってる？
確か。
知り合いに NHK に勤めている人がいて聞かされたの。
国営放送の番組に圧力をかけられる立場なんてそうそうないぜ。
私も詳細についてはわからないわ。知ってたらとっくに告発してるだろうし。
Ban leaned forward, intrigued.
俺でも大体予想はつくさ。この際はっきり言っちゃってよ。
本気で聞きたい？社会の暗部に踏み込むことになるわよ。いいの？パンチャークビになるかもしれない。
俺はニュージェネ事件の犯人さえ捕まえられりゃそれでいいんだけどね。まあどうするかは答えを聞いてから考えるわ。
Sipping her tea, Momose tapped away at her laptop keyboard with her free hand. Displayed on the screen was a single document. It contained a list of information Momose had personally looked into.
名和党。
ももちゃん勘弁してくれ。俺はてっきり野党の
Ban groaned in utter exasperation. Yet despite his smile, his eyes showed not even a hint of one. All they housed now was the cold, discerning gaze of a detective.
下手したらこの国が揺らぐぜ。
So, ich glaube, das ist ein guter Punkt, um Pause zu machen. Ich warte eigentlich schon die ganze Zeit darauf, dass das Kapitel zu Ende geht, aber irgendwie habe ich da nicht so viel Glück irgendwie. Muss ich nur die richtigen Tasten finden.